Well, nobody's here yet, but soon maybe someone will come. So, welcome to the stream, everyone. Today we're interviewing Peter Yaworski, application security engineer at Shopify, the writer of two books, Real World Bug Hunting and Web Hacking 101. And I can confess to have reading at least one of them. And with me as my co-host, we have Pat Olson as always. He's on
Yep.
the same team as me in Visma. And he's more of a programmer. I'm more of a people kind of guy. So, Peter, you want to introduce yourself to our zero viewers?
Sure, happy to. So yeah, as you mentioned, Pete Yaworski, Senior Application Security Engineer at Shopify. I've been there for 3 years, and I help kind of run the bug bounty program at Shopify, as well as a variety of other things that application security is responsible for at the company. But then, I don't know, maybe more relevantly, I also participate in bug bounties. I've been doing that since December 2015, both on HackerOne and Synac actively, and I've spent some time on BugCrowd as well. So yeah, also written the two books, as you mentioned, one of which is self-published, and then the other published through No Starch. They're generally the same book. The No Starch one is just kind of more polished content, and a few of the chapters are more in depth versus the self-published version.
So, first of all, I guess we gotta ask, how are you holding up in times like this? How do you stay sane?
Yeah, I think sane is a relative term. I mean, we're holding up well, and we're kind of lucky. My wife and I live outside of the city of Toronto. We're in the suburbs, so it's nice to have a backyard. The kids can run around playing. Like I'm lucky enough to have like a private office or room, I guess, to actually do some work while I'm working from home. And the kids they're good. They kind of understand like what's going on. And when I say I have to go to work, they understand like me going down into the office, and if the door's closed, like it's not the time to come in. Well, I guess I should say the older one understands that. The 2-year-old has no clue, and she like it's entirely possible she'll come ripping in through the door at any moment. But yeah, so other than that, it's an odd time, but we've kind of managed to stay sane as can be, I guess.
There was the before, that's going to be an after.
Yeah. Yeah, and to you in the chat, it's not Spotify, it's Shopify. I think a lot of people mistake Shopify for Spotify because of the
Oh,
names are pretty
constantly.
yeah, it's pretty similar. So
Yeah.
so
Every time I have a conversation with somebody, like I'll tell them like at the beginning of the sentence, I work at Shopify, and then like their response will be, "What's it like working at Spotify?"
yeah.
So yeah, it's
But it's also good for us to make sure that people know that it's not Shopify. I mean, it is Shopify. Fuck.
See, there you go.
Yeah. Oh man.
It's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. But yeah, let's get started with the interview. So first question: what were you like as a kid, and do you have anything kind of related to hacking, and how did you get into hacking eventually? But do you have, more importantly, do you have some memories from where you were a little child, where you were like curious and that kind of
Like,
stuff?
did you break things and see how they work? I know I
Yeah.
used to do that.
Yeah. Hmm. I've I've thought about this before, and we talked about it like internally at Shopify. We always talk about like how we got into hacking and stuff like that, and when did it start for you? Like as a kid, I was kind of like all over the place, right? Like I would read books, but I was also very athletic, right? So I played like hockey growing up. In high school, I played football. Played basketball growing up as well. So I kind of like related to like all social groups. I didn't do terribly at school. I didn't like make a concerted effort to do well. Um, so that just kind of like allowed me to kind of mix and mingle with a whole bunch of different groups. Um, so I don't know. I wouldn't say that there was one defining like characteristic of me as a child. In terms of like the hacking side of things, I never got into like the hacking um, like from the perspective of like security until like much later in my life. But I definitely was in like had that mentality of like breaking things or like bypassing restrictions or whatnot.
Mhm.
And that definitely came from my dad. Like he went to school for engineering, like dropped out, and then eventually like came back around and ended up doing the job as an engineer, but didn't like wasn't formally an engineer. But with that said, like I can remember growing up, like being like 5 or 8 years old, and like my dad saying like computers are the future, right? Like we're not buying Nintendo, we're not buying like video game consoles. You're going to use the computer. You're going to learn to use the computer. You're going to play on the computer. Everything's going to be on the computer. And so like we didn't have video game systems until like we were old enough to like get our own jobs and buy them ourselves. Um, and everything was done on the computer. And I think like probably the first memory of like a hacking approach, and I have no clue like how this actually worked, right? But like one of the first computers we brought home, um, like there was some game that a neighbor had that I really wanted to try and like play at home on our computer, and it wouldn't run. I was remember telling him like, Dad, like I want this run, and I had no clue, right? It's probably a memory issue, but I remember him like doing weird, crazy things with DOS, such that like the computer wouldn't boot into Windows, but it would boot like directly into the game. And my assumption is like purely for memory, right? Like just take all the resources and apply it to the game, rather than boot Windows. And I remember like that, like that's probably like the first memory I have of like circumventing some system to get it to do like specifically what you wanted, right? And then it probably took off from there. Like I remember having Doom and like buying like that massive like mod or WAD manual and like how you modify that. I got through like 10 pages and then like shelved it. But it was things like that too, right? Like I wanted to modify Doom. I remember getting like the aliens version of like Doom 3, where like the aliens would come at you and then like you hear Corporal Hicks like with all his profanity, which I thought was awesome at like 12 years old or whatnot, right? Like, and but that would crash within like 5 minutes, right? So I got to play like 2 minutes of it, like in Aliens, and so it's just memories like that of just like trying to circumvent things. I probably ended up getting into hacking like formally in December 2015 when I signed up for HackerOne, but I had an interest. I mean, how long is this stream? We could go on for hours. I my formal education's in like public policy and criminology,
Mhm.
and then
Wow.
so I always loved computers, wanted to get into programming. So I took like a job secondment from like the government to go do this job, and like I remember working there and like programming with like the senior engineer there. And him talking about like don't do this because like it'll result in like SQL injection or like cross-site scripting, and it's like how does all that work, like what does that mean? But I didn't really get answers, and so I always like that piqued an interest. I always wanted to go find that. Even learning Drupal, I remember some of the early Drupal videos from Lullabot, a big Drupal development company. They would put videos out, and at the end of them, they would talk about like cross-site scripting and how to avoid that with Drupal, right? I was like, oh, like where do I find more information about that? And I don't know, maybe it was a lack of effort. I never went to find it until like December 2015, where it was like all the stars aligned, and I found like a course on Coursera that was like on web security. I read the book like We Are Anonymous by Parmi Olson, and then I found like Bug Crowd's forums, which led me to HackerOne's Hacktivity, and then that just opened the like that was the floodgates. So it was like, oh my god, reading all of these reports on how you find vulnerabilities. That to me was like
I,
that was it.
I, I
The
really
clouds
gotta
parted.
say, I really gotta say, your father was a wise man. Like he could see the future. So kudos to your dad, man.
Yeah, I definitely owe him a lot. If had he not kind of pushed me that way. I remember one day like sitting with him. He used to program like the automated guided vehicles at like automotive plants in Ontario. So like he did like GM, and then he did like Ford, and then he went like down to Ohio. And I remember going with him to the office a couple of times, and then like him showing me how the programming worked and different things, and then like him and the other engineers and stuff, like we would walk the floor and they would show us like the AGVs and whatnot. It was really cool. It was, yeah, I owe
I
him a lot.
I really like that uh, the fact that the way you started was completely different from me. Because when I started, uh, I started actually like breaking shit. Pat maybe you maybe disassemble things and
Mhm.
found out how it works. But I was like, I remember my dad got one of the first laptops that you could get back in the day, and it was super expensive. My dad was the CEO of a medical company, and I tried all commands in DOS just to see what they do, and I came to format C, and I just ran it, and my dad was pissed as fuck. So I'm glad you had a much better approach than me.
Nice.
uh, yeah, Pat, do you have some awesome questions to follow up?
No, so basically you worked as a developer before, if I understand correctly. Was there any major breakpoints when you wanted to move into security, except for like this curiosity?
There wasn't, no, to be honest with you. So I always loved programming. I always thought like I wanted to work with computers. And then in like high school, you know, I took like a senior programming class. It was like, so at the time in Ontario, we had like grade 12, right? And then we have like an extra year of school called what it was called like the OAC year, like grade 13. And that was to prepare you to go to university. And so as I was getting there, like when I was grade 12, I took a programming class. And then in Ontario, like your grade 12 and grade 13 years are like your most critical years for like your grades going into university. All that to say, it's relevant because doing the programming class, there were a lot of kids like you would like write a program, right? And then like you submit that program, and then like that would be your grade. And so I remember the teacher was getting like frustrated because everyone was cheating, right? So like one person, like a couple of people would write the program, and then everyone would just copy off of that program, right? And so like everyone in the class had like 90, right? And he was just outraged. So he's like, all right, so 75% of your grade is going to be like the programs or whatnot, and then like the other 25 is going to be like your test. But if you flunk the test, then your grades on like the programs are going to come down. So we're going to like weight things. And he just like, he could never explain what was going on. But in your senior year, it's like, I don't want to have like this subjective view on like what my class is going to be that's going to like, you know, help me get into university. So I stopped taking those classes. So all that to say, I kind of got out of programming and computers there. And then that's why I went down like the criminology route. And then coming out of criminology, it's like, what am I going to actually do with this? And so I got into public policy.
But still kind
So
of
I
like
worked.
security related.
So it's very similar in that the criminology was a liberal arts degree, so it was like all logic, argument deconstruction, critical thinking, analytical, like deconstruction and like creation of an argument. So like you really had to think through like the steps on like how does this lead here to there, right? And then like finally your argument, which is very similar to like
If you
programming, right?
replace
It's
the
like,
word
okay, if I
argument with like software or system, it's kind of the same.
exact same, like you have inputs here that do this, and then you have like which will then lead you to here, right? It's that same logical flow, just one is with words and then the other is like with instructions of a computer. So criminology, didn't know what I was going to do with that, and so I looked at public policy, the idea of like just going and working for the government, and providing, you know, advice to the government of the day, which was cool. So I did my master's in that. Worked for the government for a while, and my first job out of that was a project that we were looking at to get high-speed internet to like rural Ontario, like the province within Canada. And so to do that, we had funding to create like a Web 2.0 website. And then that kind of like got me back into things because it was Drupal, and it was the time when like videos and polls and like voting and all this stuff was like Web 2.0 was like amazing, right? So then I realized like, oh, you can write like applications on the internet, and so that's why I went down like this Drupal hole. Started trying to learn Drupal, which was like crazy complex, didn't know what I was doing, and then just started like building websites for people on the side. Realized how much like that sucked, trying to manage your own clients when like all that, hated it.
Been there.
So yeah, I had an opportunity to go work at like a small startup in Toronto. And the cool thing about working for the government, at least in Ontario, was you could ask for a leave of absence. So like I had a full-time job there. I said, I want to step away for a year. They said, no problem. Your job will be here when you get back. So it was like a no risk thing for me to go. So I went and did that for a year. And then the startup culture like really sucked. Like there were nights where I worked like 24 hours, didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I did that for 18 months and then headed back to like a local government. And around that time, my wife got pregnant. And so I made the switch into security because I was looking at like, do I go with like mobile and like start trying to learn Android and do that? Or like security has always piqued my interest. And so that's when I read like Parmi Olsen and like the Coursera course. And I found like the hacktivity, and I saw people like making money on the side. And I was like, oh, I need a side hustle. people are making what seems like a boatload of money, like hacking websites. This seems really cool, and it takes out all the like administrative tasks, right? Like I don't have to go try to find clients. I don't have to find people. I don't have to chase people for money. It's just like submit a report, and then bug bounty shows up. That's amazing. So that's really what got me like into that path.
So working for governments, you often need like some kind of certification. And last stream we talked about IT security certification, and we basically came to the conclusion that they all sucks. Do you have any certifications?
I do not. I do not have any certifications. You know, people want to do certifications. People can do certifications. I've been lucky enough such that my career stream has not required that. I guess like from a public policy perspective, I wouldn't have the job without a master's, but
yeah, and to be honest, this stream does not require certificates either, so you're good.
Good.
So was there something that you wish you knew before working in IT security that you know now?
There's that we could talk about this whole stream on that. There's like a lot of like meta things, and then there's very technical things. The very like technical and specific is like pretty much every like vulnerability class, right? Like I wish that I had like come up in the era of like internet security like doesn't exist, right? And like you just go out and kind of like break whatever you want, because you would have seen that transition, right? And you could have like, had you been paying attention or like actively involved, you would have grown with that transition. So I think there would have been a lot to learn there. Now it's kind of like you try to go back to like read all the old resources, and there's always a part of me that's like nagging. It's like, oh, this still can't be the case, or like, how relevant is this? But there are concepts that like continue to creep up, where like there is value in doing that.
Is there any concept that you are more curious about right now that really found interesting?
Well, I mean, I keep going back to like even James Kettle's research on like HTTP request smuggling and whatnot, right? Like that's an old concept that he talks about the fact that he read the old articles and then like reapplied it to like new technologies now. So like that's a great example. You know, I've probably read through his articles multiple times. I don't think I've finished all the labs, but it's still not something that I've wrapped my head around fully. But it's very analogous to like me trying to learn like what an IDOR was. Like now it seems like so obvious, like an insecure direct object reference. Like how could I not have understood that at the beginning? But it took me a long time to like finally wrap my head around that and get that. And it seems very analogous with that now. The same with like HTTP pipelining. Looking at that, it's like part of the RFC. It's not like a new concept, but he kind of like brought it back. So I'd like, if I had all the time in the world, I would love to kind of go down that route, like develop that skill set and kind of like start pulling things back and trying to see where like old concepts are kind of like creeping up. Yeah, I don't know, long answer to I guess a short question, but those would probably be two examples.
But I think it's probably good that you have like some kind of focus and not trying to be like a jack of all trade.
It's hard, right? To be completely like blunt and honest, like I would love to be a jack of all trades. Like I would love to be able to like, all right, let's go in and like reverse this, and then I'm gonna like open up this hardware and like dump the firmware and do A, B, and C, and then I'll just grab my Android device and start hacking on that. Like I wish I could do that. Yeah, I don't have the time.
We just need more time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one thing I never prepared for. It was like the limited time, especially like when you factor in like a full-time job, kids, family. I'm lucky if I have a couple hours a night to do something. So I try to focus on web application.
Yeah. If a day only would have like 48 hours instead, then probably it would be possible.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I'd have no problem. I have no shortage of things I would love to get into.
So Joachim, go ahead.
Yeah. So what was life like if you compare your life before bug bounties to now with bug bounties, pretty deeply involved in your life? How would you compare those two?
And I guess both on a personal level, because you are a bug bounty hunter, but also from maybe a company perspective, from Shopify, not Spotify.
Perspective, and everything.
Just everything. Think about it all.
Just everything. Just give it to us.
But let's
So
start
like
from personal level.
Yeah.
But yeah, from the personal level, I mean, I'd be lying if I don't like to focus on like the money and the financials as much with bug bounties. Like I think ultimately it's unhealthy for that to only be the focus. But I'd be lying if I didn't say like that wasn't the motivation for me getting into bug bounties, right? Like it was entirely financially motivated. And it significantly helped. Like to be absolutely honest, it's been a world of difference. The reason why I got into it was because my wife was pregnant, and she and I were both raised by mothers that like stayed at home with us, and so we just wanted that option. We wanted to be able to choose whether or not, if Andrew wanted to stay home with my daughters, to be able to do that. And I couldn't do that at the time, just on like a government salary. And so I started to focus on like bug bounties. And once, it was hard at the beginning. Like I think it took me like 2 months to find like the first vulnerability. I paid $500, but I was like ecstatic, right? Like that was 500 USD.
But
Canadian
for
dollars.
most, considering the time you spent, it was probably not the best $500.
Oh, not at all. Like I remember seeing tweets like from somebody like talking to like another bug bounty hunter and like being like, it's ridiculous. Like for bug bounties, like you're working for like dollars an hour. And if I looked at that first vulnerability, yeah, like I probably made like $1 an hour.
Maybe
like
even some
by the time I
percent.
found it. Yeah.
Or
But
maybe
if
even
you
less,
look at
actually.
that is being generous. If I made $1
Yeah.
an hour, like I was probably doing it like maybe like 4 to 6 hours a day, like 5 days a week, and it took me 2 months, right?
So probably about
so
10 cents per hour or so. Yeah. Sounds
it
about
was
right.
was
That's
entirely
under minimum wage.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, there's no chance I made minimum wage on that bug. But that's if you just look at it in financial terms, right? Like if you look at it from like a personal growth, learning, like that was probably like one of the stages where I was learning the most. And that's something I kind of struggle with now is like how do you continue on that? And there's a lot of like research around like becoming an expert and like people that excel in their specific fields with dedicated practice. You tend to see like this huge spike in like results, and then it just like plateaus. And the thing is like, how do you get past that plateau? So yeah, financially wasn't making a lot. Like knowledge wise was probably making the most that I've ever made from a knowledge perspective.
Do you have like a
So
goal throughout the year? Like, okay, this year I'm gonna find 10 bounties.
so I tried doing that. At the beginning, it didn't. I didn't. At the beginning, it was like, I just want to find bugs. I just want to like make a little bit of money. Just want to do something. As long as it's enough that like my wife can afford to like make the choice that she wants to make. Then when I started finding bugs, my first goal that like really comes into my mind, and I still think this is what I sit down and strive for, is like each time I sit down at the computer, I want to find a bug. I want to have one report. And so I tend to be happy if I just get something submitted that session that I'm doing. I did try, and I tried the like, okay, I want to make like X amount in a year, and it wasn't for me. That's when I started like looking at that and analyzing that. I realized the financial goal isn't motivating for me, and if anything, it's probably caused me more anxiety. And it took me down the other path where I was like, this isn't enjoyable anymore. I don't want to do this.
So basically, it
So
affected your mental health, kind of like.
I 100%.
Yeah.
I would say probably like there's probably a good 12 months where like I was just super anxious. And that's when, I was on Twitter all the time. You'd be inundated with like the success of other people. I'd be looking to see like who's earning bounties, what are they finding, what are they finding that I missed. It all kind of culminated in like just this terrible feeling. I hated it. And that's when I started like muting the keywords for like people like tweeting those common tweets of like, yeah, I was just paid X. I mute all of those so I don't see them. I removed like Twitter from my phone so I couldn't like check it all the time, and just slowly kind of tried to detox from like all things digital, such that I would only kind of like engage with them like when I wanted to engage with them. So even now, like I've kind of like continued that trend where We talked about it, in the pre-call, but like I don't go on Twitter really anymore. I got to a point where I decided, maybe I check Twitter at like 10 o'clock in the morning and like 3 o'clock. And then there were times where I would just forget to do any of that. And I was like, my life seems no different right now. I don't really need this. And so now it's like, I'll end up like, I'll forget about it for like 3 weeks. And then something will queue up and I'm like, oh, I got to go do this. And then I get on it and I just scroll through to see like, what have I missed? And it's usually nothing. And so, I'll spend like maybe 10 minutes on it, and then 3 weeks later, I'll be back at it. In terms of the, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So you talked about like mental stuff and etc. But now, for example, so that was in the past. But how is life kind of now for you? If you think about, because
Yes,
Bug Bounty is still part of your life pretty much, but how's life now for you?
bug bounties definitely like I owe a lot to bug bounties, right? Like when I think about it, I still thoroughly enjoy them. I still advocate them massively. I just don't advocate for them as like purely from a financial goal, right? Like I advocate more from like a development knowledge and like personal growth perspective. And that said, like money is still like a huge part of that.
But mostly it as a
But it's
bonus.
just exactly. But at the same time, like I say that there'll definitely be times where like if I don't get a bounty within, sitting down at the keyboard, say, after like 3 or 4 nights or something like that, like it will start to like drive me crazy. But all that said, I took partially like because I wanted to, partially because I was like forced to. We like renovated our house, and so we started that like the beginning of the year, and it like went to like the end of March. So I pretty much took like time off for bounties from the middle of December all the way to the end of March. Just didn't do them because there was like so much stress going on, like not having 3/4 of your house. And it was probably like the best thing that I had done, right? Like I came back feeling super refreshed. Went after a target that I typically go after, and I think I want to say like it's a public target. Everybody hacks on it, and I think I came out of there like 10 for 10 in terms of like nights that I sat down on the keyboard to hack on them. Every night I came away with a bounty, and it was a great bounty. So yeah, all that to say, I feel good. Hacking on Synac actively again, doing well there. So I'm just trying to make sure that for me, if bug bounties become like, once they start to feel like a job, then I just kind of disengaged. And that really happens a lot when I have like companies reach out or like message me and be like, hey, like we just launched this, like come check it out. And the old me would be like, sorry, like Andrea, my wife, like you've got the kids, just got this new opportunity. I've got to go check this out. Now it's like that target is going to be there along with like, 100 other targets. I'll get to it when I get to it. And that has made like a big difference. Me being in the driver's seat of like that mentality versus having that mentality kind of drive me.
That reminds me of something that I saw today, which was actually because you were saying like companies are inviting you to hack, etc. One of the guys in one of the Slack channels I'm in said that he posted a picture from a private program. Apparently, he didn't tell me the name, but it said excluded all reports from Yaworsk.
Yeah, I know that program.
Please tell me more about this. I'm so curious. What is this?
So yeah. So yeah, I won't name names. I won't name the program. But I knew the chief security officer of a company that was like launching a bug bounty program. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be invited to hack on them early before anybody else was there. Me and another person. So so when I hack, like I am like super. I don't know if it's the Canadian in me or what, but like I take it very personally, and I feel very very bad if I like submit noise. Right. So if I submit an invalid report or I submit anything, I feel like super bad. And there was like an application logic vulnerability, if memory serves. And I remember like writing my report. I was like, I don't know if you want this. I'm really sorry if you don't. This is like, and then so I laid out like this is the reason why it's a problem. And it was one of those application vulnerabilities where it's like this is by design, but you don't realize the unintended consequences, like when like this happens, right? And so I wrote it up and submitted it, and he was like, no, this is awesome, this is a great report. And then like to bust my chops, we were in a chat, all three of us, like the CISO, the other hacker, and myself, and we got talking. And I think we were talking about that or some other report. And he was like, okay, 1 second, hold on. And he went and edited the policy, and he put that line in there for the program exclusions. And then he's since moved on from the company, but that line has stayed in the program policy from that date. So it is still there. I was going to tweet about that the other day, actually. Like, you made it when, yeah, and you're you're there. That said, I've got the highest bounty that I've ever received from that company. So there's that.
Nice. What was your highest bounty?
It was a 5-figure bounty.
Wow.
It was a good bounty. I remember I was driving with my wife to my daughter's school, and I knew it was a bad bug because I knew the guy that was like triaging it, and I found it at night. And I stumbled across it, to be honest. I wasn't even looking for it. I did something, and I was like, that shouldn't have worked. Like, why did that work? That didn't make any sense. And then when I dug into it, I was like, oh, this seems really bad. And I had known of how it could be really bad, but I didn't know like fully how to exploit it. And so I submitted the report, and I like pinged my friend and said like, hey, I just submitted this. You might want to take a look at it. And he was 3 hours back from me, and I think I was going bed at midnight or something like that. And then I woke up at like 7, and I had a message from like 5 hours later after that. It's like, we fixed it. Thanks very much. That was an amazing bug. It was actually really bad. And for this reason. And so I knew it could get there. I just didn't know how to get there. And then, so anyways, like, I think it was that same day, my wife and I were driving over to like my daughter's school, and I got like the email. I was like, oh shit. And she's like, what's wrong? What? And I didn't say anything. I was just like, here, like, you could read the email. And I was like, yeah, it was insane. So all that to say, like, there are other people that are out there that are like bringing home 5-figure bounties, close to 6-figure bounties, like routinely, I guess. I'm not one of those people. I'm happy just like consistently, bringing in, say, $1,000 a week. So this one was like a large jump above that.
Here's an important question related to that. So you got a nice bounty, but did you take your wife out for dinner?
No, it went in the bank. Maybe we ordered. A lot of my bounties just end up going in the bank. We've always kind of like paid ourselves like an allowance. And so regardless of how well I'm doing in bounties, or like whatever money I'm making, like we just stick to that allowance. And then if there's like larger projects or things that we want to do, like maybe we'll splurge. But no, there was nothing special that came out of that one. I don't think. Sometimes we'll buy things like if we like really want something, like, like I bought myself an Xbox or something like that. I can't even think of like the things that like my wife has bought, but like we've done like landscaping for the house and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very few and far between.
Yeah, we have a few more hackers in some upcoming episode, and it really have changed their lives also, the bug bounties that we paid out. And that's only the bounties that we from our company have paid out. But it really had made a huge impact on some people's life.
From a total perspective, like I wouldn't be at Shopify if it weren't for bug bounties, right? Like, I remember like applying to Shopify, I want to say in like 2008 or 2009. It was a cool story where like a whole bunch of like IBM laid off a whole bunch of people in Ottawa, which is like our nation's capital. And Shopify was like, let's get out there. And so like they went on the sidewalk and like pitched the tent like that day. And we're like, okay, you guys come work for Shopify. Like we'll interview you right now. And to me, like that was when I was working for policy. I didn't have a computer background, but I was like, that is amazing. Like I want to work for, like, that to me was like an epiphany moment where it's like, you can work for a private company that like does like good in the world. Like you're not just working for $1. So I really wanted to work for Shopify at that point. So I like knew a friend of a friend who was a developer at the company. We got talking about like what skills should I develop to like do that. And then like years later had another conversation. It was like, this is not the right time. And then anyways, if it weren't for bug bounties, like I got the bug bounties, went to San Francisco, and Shopify was a target, and I got talking with like the recruiter there, and that's how I ended up at Shopify. But if it weren't for bug bounties, I wouldn't be in security. I wouldn't be in tech, like in Shopify doing this. Maybe I'd be in the development side of things, but I have a lot of freedom and luxury, particularly because of bug bounties, right? Like that allowance that I talk about, like my wife and I taking, that's bug bounty money, right? Like it all goes in the bank and then we pay ourselves once a month. And we get it's not like I can go out and buy like any house that I want, but we just don't feel strapped for cash. And even like, all the benefits of being at Shopify has been because of bug bounties.
And it's always like an additional source of income. Like you're not relying on a single source.
And that's we've made sure, like I've made that conscious decision, and she has as well, like agreed with it, and we've kind of come to terms with the fact that regardless of how much we're making in bug bounties, like it's not going to change what we're making. Like that's not consistent money, right? So like the salary that I get from Shopify kind of like goes towards our essentials and pays all of our bills, and we can live comfortably that way. And then everything that we get from bug bounties, that allowance, is just kind of like icing on the cake. So yeah, again, a lot of it ends up going into like retirement savings. Because I don't know, I have this goal of like wanting to retire at like 50 or 55 or something. So I don't know.
I like that target. That
try to get there.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about what you do at Shopify currently, because we kind of gone from you as a child all the way to Shopify, and you started mentioning Shopify more and more now. So let's talk about Shopify.
Yeah.
What are you doing right now?
Yeah, right now I'm in this like weird inflection period of like changing things up. So for a long time, so I'm still like I'm largely responsible for administering the bug bounty program. And what I mean by that is like like the contract discussions, following up with HackerOne on like program requests, the renewals and all that kind of stuff. But the team, we're a team of 11 on the application security, what we call like the breaker side. And we have responsibility for the bug bounty program. So we all are involved in like actually working on the reports. So we do that through like a 2-week rotation where we have what we call a primary and secondary. Primary is responsible for like managing the queue. So they'll respond to like all the reports, comments that are coming in. The secondary is intended to actually open PRs to fix like all the triaged reports. In reality, since maybe the beginning of April, since Ron Chan found some big bugs and we disclosed them, our volume has like 4x'd in the program. So we don't have that luxury of like the primary, secondary doing different things. More often than not, they're both triaging the queue and responding to things. We also take an approach of requiring like 2 other people to give the okay or thumbs up on your proposed action, right? So if I'm this primary and I get a report in, I want to triage it. I'm responsible for reading the report, summarizing it, going and finding the root cause analysis, understanding what's going on, confirming with the dev team it's not known, this is an intended behavior. And then I come back to the team and say like, these are the actions that I want to take. Here's my proposed response. And 2 other team members have to give the thumbs up on that for that to actually happen. And so long as there's no dissenting opinions, then we action that report. So all of that to say with this volume, a lot of the time recently has been like on HackerOne. The last 2 months, we've, as a team, taken a week to like all try to open PRs and start shipping fixes for bugs. But even doing that, we've probably ended up netting, like maybe we've shipped like 20 or 30 PRs to resolve bugs, but then we've only like netted like a 10 report reduction because of the volume that is continuing to come in on the program. So that's like the HackerOne side of things, which takes up anywhere from like 50% of my time. The other side is like coding internal tooling at Shopify. So we're constantly looking at like automation and how can we improve our tooling to improve the ecosystem for commerce, right? Like how do we make commerce more secure?
Do you have like a security program with static code analysis and dynamic and so on?
So we do use, so another team member is responsible for a lot of the security reviews. He's taken on like owning those, and he uses Brakeman because we're a Rails shop, so we're able to do that. So we use Brakeman. We also have maybe it's a common term, maybe it's not, but they're like caution bots. So because code is being deployed in like CI, we have bots that will like regex on certain things, right? So an example being in Rails, there's a method called HTML safe, which is like opposite to what the name implies. So if you want something to go out as HTML, you take it as HTML safe, right? And that's a very common way to introduce cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, because you're saying like, you know, don't worry, like render this as HTML, whereas Rails will escape it by default for you. So we'll look for that. Like we'll have caution bots for that. So if you introduce HTML safe, you'll get an immediate warning that says like caution bot, like, hey, we saw you using this. Please be careful it doesn't have any user input, because it's a common way to introduce.
Do you have it like a Git pre-commit or something like that?
I think we lost Peter.
Nope.
But he's back now.
Is it better?
Yeah,
yeah, just a hiccup.
It's sorry about that. It's on CI. So like as soon as you submit, it's like through our it's through a GitHub integration that ends up happening. But it's also like there's that one. There's the same thing for like React dangerous inner HTML. We have like permission checks that are the same thing. Like if you try to implement something with GraphQL where you don't explicitly define a permission to it, you'll get a notice that says like, hey, when you do this, everybody has access to it. And so that has been helpful, because it's more like the guardrails that are being set up for developers, as opposed to us explicitly blocking or like becoming an impediment to development. We don't want to do that. Like our goal at Shopify is very much to complement development as opposed to impede it.
Yep. That is also something that we really have been working on, like this old way of working with don't do this, don't do that. It doesn't really work anymore. So we're kind of like the nice security guys. So everyone actually likes us, because we say we recommend that you do this, and we can provide you with assistance and expertise on why it is bad and what you should do. But you are making the final decision in the team, and we trust them to do a good decision. And that has really paid off.
That's exactly our approach as well. It allows you to empathize with people, right?
And especially in our security team, most of us or all of us has either had a development background, like I've been programming for more than 15 years, and some of the other teams have like operation background. So we have been in the same seat as the developers. We know what works and what doesn't work, what's only like a pain in the ass to do, and what really matters.
Yeah. So since you guys have been triaging, and you've probably been triaging a lot yourself as well, what is kind of the coolest bug, or the like if you think back, what's a really cool bug that you were like, wow, this is awesome?
It doesn't have to be the highest paid out, but like most interesting.
The most interesting. And it could be, it doesn't need to be your like something that you triage. Maybe it was something you just saw in Hacktivity, for example, or
like most creative.
Oh, that's good. Like from anything, like in the Shopify program, like we disclose, we try to disclose all of our reports. Like we ask for disclosure on like 95% of them, and then it's up to like the hacker to agree to that. The other 5% are like, there's a variety of reasons why we can't request disclosure. But the SSRF from like Andre is probably notorious, right? Like it's still our highest paid bug at like 25K. Where it was like exploiting like the GCP metadata endpoint, which was like unpublished version 1 endpoint versus like the version 2 that was live. That was really cool. In terms of like bugs that I've seen, man, there's so many of them. I just keep going back to like the repo that I maintain. So on GitHub, I try to track all the reports, and this is very much like inspired by Philippe Harwood, who's one of the top hackers on like Facebook. He was maintaining a list of like all the Facebook bugs that he found. And so I started trying to do that. A lot of the recent ones were like pivoting through internal systems, like through SSRF. Like I think of like Julian's bug where he used Google's DNS tools to actually like port scan internally and find like a Minecraft server. But it was like a website and like web tools that were available for everyone to use. And nobody found this bug, and then he just went and did it, right? And then there was, another Google bug where it was like just changing the host header, which like did something stupid and like opened up access to that, right? I tend to really be impressed by people that find bugs on like Facebook and Google and whatnot, where it's like you need like an intricate knowledge of what's going on. I have a couple bug reports open that I want to end up reading that are like, unfortunately I can't even remember the guy's name, but I think I just added them to the like GitHub repo. But it's a guy who's like going like after the internal tooling of Google, like their online code dev tools. And he understands like how their like entire infrastructure works and has found like $30,000 bugs in those. Those to me are really cool. Yeah, those are the types that end up standing out to me.
Which one is the coolest one that you reported yourself?
Probably the ones that there's a couple. So trying to think of, I'm humming and hawing because the coolest one that I like the most, I don't even know if I'm allowed to discuss. It was under like NDA. But
well,
it
you
was
can
through
discuss the
Synac.
technical details maybe without mentioning like the name.
So it was, yeah, I definitely cannot mention the name. So the one that stands out in my mind is like with Synac. It was a vulnerability in the configuration for like the JavaScript, the web APIs for like file persistence. So there's like a web API for like file persistence. You can do like temporary persistent. Temporary is like it ends with the session, like you close the browser and like that file's gone. The persistent storage is like an API that ends up creating like a file system, like like a sandboxed file system that stays permanently there, right? So when you would like upload files, like you would upload them to this like dialog, and then it would go to like your persistent storage, and then from your persistent storage it would go to like the actual website. All of that becomes cool because like the talented, like the amount of talented hackers that were hacking on this was like crazy, but nobody picked up on that. And so like when you would go to upload a file, it wouldn't actually upload. And so that was a cue for me. I was like, where is this file actually going? And so I started digging into like the JavaScript, the internals to understand what was going on. And it became really cool because as you would upload and download files, they would always remain a copy on your computer in persistent storage. So now if you had like a regular cross-site scripting, which is kind of boring, you could actually take that cross-site scripting and exfiltrate all the files that a particular user like had access to. And given the nature of like the system we were testing, like this was amazing. And so it was really cool because I submitted the report, and Synac, to their credit, like their triage team was like, you should develop the exploit for this and show them how this will actually happen. And like we'll pay you in accordance with that. And so I wasn't a JavaScript expert at the time. It took me a long time to actually do this. And so like I wrote this exploit and was working with like the VulnOps team to actually like confirm it. And so I remember like going back and forth with Jake on Slack, be like, okay, try this. Does this work? Okay, try that. Try this. Try that. And there was like 30 minutes before like the actual engagement was supposed to stop, and then we got it. I exfiltrated like all of the files from like Jake,
Nice.
like on the VulnOps team, and it was like virtually we were like, yeah, high five, like over Slack, right? But it was that was really really cool. So that was probably one of the most memorable. The other is like the time that I found the hidden S3 bucket on like HackerOne. That was I didn't come up with S3 bucket hacking, but it wasn't like super well known. And so I found like the hidden bucket on HackerOne. That was cool to like hack the hackers, right? I got my hoodie from them at that point. That was before they were like giving out hoodies to anybody. It was $2,500 from HackerOne. That was really cool. And then one of my first vulnerability that I found on Airbnb, they were a private program, and they must have invited like the top 50 hackers on like the HackerOne board. But there were a lot of big names there, right? Like Franz was on there, like Ben was on there, Arnie was on there. They were all finding vulnerabilities, right? And so I thought, like, it was that typical mentality of I'm not going to find anything on this. Why am I even going to bother? And I don't know why, but for some reason I decided to hack on it and continue on and give it a go. And I found like a cross-site scripting, which would have allowed like a stored cross-site scripting that I could have used on anybody. It was blocked by CSP. And so I didn't know that at the time that it was being blocked by CSP. I just remember seeing like the HTML is there, like why isn't this firing? And I had no clue. And I sat on it for a week because I didn't know. This was like at the beginning of 2017 or something like that. Like I didn't know any better. And then I remember like distinctly walking my dog and I was like, oh, IE doesn't support CSP. And so like I ran home and tried it in IE, and sure enough, like the XSS popped. And so I submitted the report just saying that, and they gave me the max cross-site scripting vulnerability payout for that, which was really cool. That still stands out in my head because like it was Airbnb, like that to me. I still think they're an amazing security team, amazing application. So like to find vulnerabilities in there, like I thoroughly enjoy that because it's more of like it's my own satisfaction to think of like the quality of people that they employ there, both from security and engineering, and to find bugs. Not to toot my own horn, but I think that's pretty cool. And so like to find that one, especially with that talented people like providing that product, and then B, like the talented hackers that were there that were actually testing the product and application. It was cool to kind of like feel like I beat out everybody to find that cross-site scripting bug.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. This kind of brings me to the fact that, for example, you mentioned that for this one bug, you really couldn't say anything about which company it was, etc. So, what is your take on transparency in this scene?
So I am 100% like one of the reasons why I'm at Shopify is because Shopify is transparent, right? Like when I was writing all of those bug reports on the Hacktivity, there were Shopify reports. I'm a huge proponent of that. I definitely advocate for that internally as well as the team. It's a value that we try to live up to and we take very seriously. I think personally, when you disclose reports, it provides like a wealth of knowledge for everybody, right? Like customers are actually able to see like, here's what's going on, here's how our security team is responding to things. Like they have my data, like we're responsible for people's merchandise, right? Like their commerce. So to see that transparency and like be able to peek behind the veil, to me, like that's huge. From the hacker's perspective, like you can see how our program operates, right? Like if we're going to reward a bounty, having everybody be able to see that allows them to understand what to expect from our program. So what's the communication going to be like? How are we going to award our bounties? And if if you don't agree with the bounty, you can ask that question and we'll explain it to you, and we'll go back and forth. And we have increased bounties before, like most recently with somebody who's very active. We made the wrong call. They pointed out like an additional impact that we hadn't considered, and so we doubled the bounty for them. So there, right there, you have your customers, you have the hackers. From the broader like program perspective, everybody gets to learn from all of this, right? Like you can see what it looks like to have like a company like Shopify operating and receiving reports, but also like what type of reports are you getting, right? So if you're not getting the volume that you want, why is that? If you can look at how other people that are getting the volume, and we can see all those metrics on HackerOne, how they're operating, what their policy looks like, how they're engaging with hackers, why hackers want to do that. It's just another thing that you can rely on to improve your program. And once that is all out there, right, like all you're doing is leveling everybody up, right? Developers will read that, see, okay, here's the bug. I'll go back and I'll look at my code base to see if I did the same thing, right? Hackers will look at that, and now they have a new skill set, right? Like you can take that and apply it to self-learning, like we talked about before, like in terms of like the dedicated practice. And can you go back and replicate that or see how that person found that bug, and then add that to your repertoire, right? So if you see a certain behavior, it's like, oh, I know that behavior happens to be associated with server-side request forgery or local file inclusion or like insecure direct object reference. It just brings that level of security up for everybody.
Yeah, we see the same thing internally. So I'm responsible for a lot of our security training initiatives where we do like a capture the flag event with developers, and many of them have contacted me afterwards and say like, oh, this cross-site scripting that we learned about, I went back and checked my own code and I fixed a bunch of them.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like it's when you level everybody up, everybody wins.
Yeah, and I also remember when I started my first bug bounty program back in the day, and you were part of it. I remember us talking quite a bit, and we talked about this pre-stream, basically, where one guy found a RCE in a Java library pretty quickly after we started. And I
Yep.
figured it was such an awesome bug that I had to share it with everyone. So I posted like because we were private back then, and we couldn't really, back then you couldn't publish, I think, in a private program for the hackers in that program. So I created a
Yep.
blog post with all the details of it. Like I asked the hacker if we can publish everything, and that was really amazing. And so I've shared the same view as you with when it comes to
Hmm.
transparency, and I always try to advocate it as well. So I think
And
it's
same with
great.
our
Yeah.
company. Like our company, they also took Joachim's tweet and made it into a blog post to our customers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could talk about it until I'm like blue in the face.
But
I
I
think
think
there's
it's
huge
really
value in
good.
it.
I think it's really good to see that actually now companies are taking security seriously and
Hmm.
actually see it as a competitive advantage.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yep. Yep. And it definitely is a competitive advantage, right? Like
Mhm.
if you don't have the trust of your customers, right? Like you're not going to be around long.
Yeah, trust and security and the transparency. Like, if there's one company that are transparent, saying like, okay, we had these issues, we have fixed them, we know about it. I would rather pick that company than a hush company that do not want to speak anything, like a blanket message. We take security seriously, but no more information.
Well, exactly, right? Because like it's inevitable. Like when you ship code, right? Like there's
Yeah,
always
yeah,
going to be bugs in the code, and
yeah.
so there's no point in hiding that, right? Like
Like
it's a
you know the
reality of
saying,
software development.
there is two types of company: the ones that has been hacked and the ones that doesn't know it yet.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh, that's a great question. But I don't know if, well, Peter, you're very transparent, right? And so, has Shopify been hacked? Ooh.
Have we been hacked?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we ask people to hack us every day. So I guess like if you would, yes, because our bug bounty program is out there, we get valid reports.
But
Um,
okay, so let me refresh the question. Have you been hacked to the terms where someone has actually, like, let's say, a government of some sort or something else has gone inside? Because I don't know if you saw this, but Visma was hacked by a certain country, and uh, and we released a transparent report about that. Have you done the same, or
I
has it?
haven't seen any I haven't
Yeah.
seen any reports. Um, I mean, yeah, if it happened, it's above my pay grade. So anything that we have is, as far as I know, is transparent and would be out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately, I can't give you a straight answer just because when I am VP of Security and Trust at Shopify, I will gladly come back on. We can probably talk about that because I'll have much more purview as to whether or not it's there's anything to actually discuss. But from my low level on the totem pole, I have no idea.
Cool.
So the stream is about, and do we have any final question, Joachim? Like looking ahead in the future, do you have any upcoming plans, like writing any more books or similar?
I think about volume. Actually, somebody like asked me on Twitter today, or maybe I just found the tweet today about like volume 2 on whether or not I would do it. I don't. I constantly think about what volume 2 could look like, or what the next like security book might look like. But no, I don't have any active plans. Like I kind of got burnt out doing all of that. The book took a lot more work than I thought it would. Even the interviews, like I want to continue doing them, but there are a lot of people that are doing very similar things now. I'm on this podcast right now, which like didn't exist when I wanted to start, right?
Mhm.
So I've kind of toned all that back. I don't know. I'm just kind of enjoying just participating in bug bounties right now. I definitely want to find ways to give back. That is always kind of on my mind, and that was part of the impetus for starting the book. Was like I said, like we talked about it, like how bug bounties can change your life. I still think they're an avenue to do that to people. So anybody that will like listen, like, I've had neighbors who have lost their jobs, and I've given them copies of the book that I have left over, like in hopes that they start hacking, and then like
Mhm.
I'll talk to them, ask questions or answer questions, and try to get them going up. Kind of what's going on. I think it's that if I do anything, I want to find a way to kind of like help people kind of get there, and use bug
Really good.
bounties to change their lives too.
So to follow up that question, we have a question in the chat. Now is
Ooh.
kind of your chance. So what would you suggest as a career path to become an application security engineer, for example, to be hired like in an entry role?
That's a good question. I mean, I can't speak to other companies. I can tell you what our hiring process was like at Shopify. So like there's a round of interviews. And one of the things that I think Shop is pretty transparent. Like Shopify looks for like the growth mentality, right? So that being the idea of like we're all kind of innately the same. There's nothing that differentiates me from you in terms of our ability. And so like we look for that type of person that will like go out and try to learn something new, and take the initiative to develop their own skill set. So that's kind of like the first and foremost that kind of like gets you in the door at Shopify in a conversation. After that, hiring on the application security team, there's a coding interview, right? So we just want to know that you have basic skill set for coding. I think if you're going to go to any application security team, you want to have that, because you're going to be involved in developing tooling to try to avoid vulnerabilities. And if you're not, you're going to be digging into code and have to know how to read code and figure out like where a vulnerability lies.
Especially like some basic Python, JavaScript, and so on.
Exactly. And so for like us is like if you know Ruby and Rails, but on the flip side, you can do your programming interview in any language that you want, right? So if you want to come in and do it in Golang, come in and do it in Golang. So there's like those basic skills. And then there's also going to be like a hacking interview, right? So we usually take like a vulnerable web app and we just hack on it, right? So what vulnerabilities can you find? And more often than not, we're just asking like, what's your thought process? What did you find? What are you thinking? What are you testing for? And then if you find something, you'll more than likely face questions on like, how would you remediate that? What would be your advice to developers? How would you talk to them? How would you tell them? How would you explain what that bug is? So I think if you want to get into application security, the big thing is like the technical skills, the hacking skills, and then the communication to be able to convey those kind of complex topics and be able to empathize with developers who like implemented that bug, right? To go to tell them like, hey, you've had this vulnerability here, like that's going to suck for people to hear, especially depending upon where they are in their career path. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that was good.
Yeah,
I would probably also add curiosity to the list.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's that comes up routinely for us, is like even like on the team. So we are very much a team that's focused on like pushing and prodding each other. And so we will constantly question each other. So that curiosity comes up where you don't necessarily always appreciate the assumptions that you're making. So it's like, I think I found the root cause analysis, but I didn't like go that one step lower in the debugging, right? So I think the function works this way. You will get asked that question, right? So it's like, if you think you should know it, right? Like dig down on that, like get used to like just continually pulling back those covers, particularly from the curiosity perspective, like just foster
there also
that.
seems to be like a lot of career opportunity. Like if you are a developer at Shopify at the moment, you can, I guess, pretty easily become part of the security team instead, or vice versa.
There's a lot of movement, like the 2 or 3 hires most recently on the team. They didn't have a security background. One was like, a strong developer, strong GraphQL background. Another, again, came up through like support, and was doing investigations, so like strong investigations background. Another was like reverse engineering on the internal security team, started participating in the bug bounty, like triage rotation, a strong skill set in debugging and finding root cause analysis. And so now all 3 are on like application security with us.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, it probably doesn't hurt if you have a HackerOne or a BugCrowd profile where you have some findings. Some of those may be disclosed in like programs like Shopify or others that disclose their bugs. So they are kind of like your CV. And then, of course, platforms like Hack the Box, etc., will probably also help you. But on that note, I think we're kind of out of time now, so we're gonna have to let Peter go back to his family here. So,
thank you so
very much,
Peter, for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great.
So
Have a nice day.
thank you, everyone, and I'll stop streaming now. Goodbye.